This is Sheba and I'll be your co-host for tonight. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Stephen Delbos, Senior Director of Product Knowledge Activation at Muse. Stephen brings over 20 years of experience in product content, strategy, and knowledge operations. He specializes in building and leading teams that span documentation, content design, product education, and AI-assisted support, transforming content into a strategic tool for user success. In this session, he will cover how to transform traditional product descriptions into structured, machine-readable data, applying product knowledge activation principles to hospitality offerings. He will explain how to define product in terms of attributes, relationships, and behaviors, enabling better searchability, discoverability, and automated merchandising. The session will also explore how structured content supports dynamic bundling, pricing, and personalization while helping build a scalable content foundation that powers AI-driven operations. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll make sure to address them towards the end of the session. With that, I'll hand it over to Stephen. The stage is yours.
Great. Thanks so much. Happy to be here, and thanks for joining. Yes, today I'll be talking about product content in the age of AI. I think it's a really interesting moment for all content teams, and certainly at this point, AI is nothing new, but the speed and the acceleration of the technology, I think, is incredible, really, and brings us to, I think, an inflection point for specifically for people involved in content, but more broadly, I think anyone involved in tech. I think with large language models being what they are, working with language, when ChatGPT first came out and exploded in popularity, the first teams that were asked, I think, what are you doing with AI, tended to be content teams, marketing teams, teams that work with language, just because, you know, our bread and butter is the foundation of these models and the way that they work. But interestingly, I see, you know, with Claude Design recently and Claude Code, for example, teams of all sorts in tech, from design teams to engineering teams, are all in this very interesting moment of really trying to, you know, continue to do the work that they need to do, but at the same time needing to kind of future-proof themselves and figure out this technology. And I think more than anything I've seen in my career, this is, as I said, a pivotal moment or an inflection point. And I think there are a lot of personal questions that people in content need to ask themselves about the nature of their work and why they do it. A lot of challenges that this technology brings up, especially regarding the acceleration of content, but also a lot of really great opportunities. I think AI is a massive opportunity for content teams specifically to really level up what they're doing, both in terms of production, of course, and the speed of content creation, but also in terms of reach, in terms of moving into new forms, new media. I think it's a massive opportunity with the right attitude, but it's a challenging moment. It's an inflection point, a pivotal moment, a turning point. And so my journey and my team's journey at Muse with this technology is what I'd like to walk you through today, and hopefully leave you with some strategies, maybe some tools, some tips that you can use to navigate this period of intense and rapid change. I like to think about this in a metaphorical way. You know, on the one hand, AI is a technology like any other, the printing press, you know, the invention of the internet, etc. But of course, it's more than that. It's a paradigm shift in the way that we work, the way that we think about tech and content, and the way that we think about our role and our purpose as content people. And as I've talked through this with my team over the last, at this point, couple years, it was a couple years ago that we really started leaning into ChatGPT and building our own GPTs, but more recently with Claude and starting to get into more agentic activities. I think about this kind of metaphorically, and the kind of motto or the takeaway from this talk ultimately is grab the paintbrush. And so if you think back in ancient time, caveman days when people were painting on cave walls with their hands, and there were these artists who were producing this art, producing this content with pigment and using their hands and drawing on the cave walls. And if you imagine at that point someone coming into the cave with a paintbrush and offering that paintbrush to the cave painters, certainly there would be a number of those painters who would say, I really like painting with my hands. I like the feel, I like the connection, I like the process, and I'm not interested in this new tool. I'm not interested in this paintbrush. I'm going to keep doing what I've always been doing because that's what I really love. And others would have grabbed the paintbrush, and using the paintbrush, maybe they would have said, okay, this doesn't feel quite as organic or as intimate as painting with my hands does, but wow, suddenly I can reach much higher on the wall of the cave than I could before. I can paint on the roof of the cave. I can paint faster. I can paint more. And this is the moment I think we're in content with AI. And I'm thinking now about content in terms of documentation, but more broadly in terms of design and instructional design. And we're suddenly presented with this tool, which on the one hand gives us the opportunity to do more, to do it faster, to do things that maybe we never imagined before. And for some people, that's an amazing opportunity. And for others, it's a threat, and I think for content people in the age of AI, there's a really personal question that you need to ask yourself. And, that is like, why do I do what I do? And myself, I'm at heart, I'm a writer. I love writing. I love using language. It's really important to me. But I think the question we need to ask as content people with AI is, do I love what I do because I love the craft of writing and I don't want to give that up? Or do I love what I do because I love, the other elements of it, the communication aspect, the clarity, making complicated things clear. And in that case, if that's the answer, that I love being in content because I like making things accessible, I like making things clear, I like communication, then in that case, AI is a force multiplier. It's a tool that will allow you to create more, create faster, and create things in different formats than maybe you ever imagined before. But for other people, they really love the craft of writing, and hand creating these documents and tailoring documents. And for those people, I can totally understand that they're not interested in AI. But for me, I think we all need to ask ourselves this question. And my advice to you is grab the paintbrush, because if you're at a company now where there's a push toward AI, there's a push toward automation, and you feel like, yeah, no, this isn't why I got into it. I'm going to go someplace else. Well, wherever you go, you're going to end up having that exact same conversation. I feel like this is a global, universal shift, a universal moment. And as I said, I think it's a massive opportunity for content people, specifically for content people, but only if you choose to accept this new tool, only if you grab the paintbrush. So that's the underlying theme of what I'll be talking about today. And hopefully I'll be giving you some tools to move you in that direction. But ultimately, taking advantage of AI as a content person or in a content team, it really starts with acknowledging this as a tool that's going to fundamentally change the way that you conceive of your job and the value of what you do. And you need to be comfortable with that. So I was already introduced, but I've been in content for 20 years, more than 20 years, really. I've worked in digital agencies. I've worked in small tech startups, currently working for Muse, which is a hospitality technology company. We create an ecosystem for hospitality tech, everything from property management to point of sale to revenue management. And what has really guided me across my career in different companies, in different industries, is a love of communication, a love of using language to simplify difficult things. And I love the idea of language, which is a human invention, as an interface between technology and people. The QR code will take you to my LinkedIn profile, so I'd be happy to connect. I'm always happy to talk to other people in the field, and let's keep the conversation going after today. So I lead a team called Product Knowledge Activation, and this is a team that brought together two historic teams at Muse, and one being the product content team, which consists of technical writers doing the technical documentation like release notes and help articles, along with knowledge management, who, as we'll see soon, is in charge of our customer support chatbot, our AI chatbot, which is fed on the knowledge base, which we'll get into in great detail. And then also the global education team, which is creating our learning platform in our learning management system, and that's called Muse University. And so when we brought these teams together about a year ago, the opportunity that we saw in doing so was really to, for the first time, take a truly holistic approach to customer-facing educational content from end to end, bringing together documentation and release notes, which is, really about awareness. And there's a certain instructional aspect to documentation as well. Bringing that together with our training content and thinking about this content as part of the product, as part of the user experience, and really trying to take a holistic approach from end to end of, how do we onboard people into this complex product that we have, and how do we train them? And then how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them informed as we continue to release new features and new products? How do we ensure that people are constantly expanding their ability and maximizing the value of Muse? So ultimately, our North Stars revolve around customer support tickets. We know that trained users open fewer customer support tickets, and product adoption. We know that users who interact with our release notes and our content adopt features more quickly and more readily. So those two things, cutting down on customer support tickets, or we could say increasing self-service and increasing feature adoption and product adoption, are really our ultimate goals. And everything that we create and produce is targeted toward those two goals. So kind of that realization where we had these different teams across the organization, the global education team, which sat in customer success, and product content, which sat in R&D, kind of realizing that they're all doing similar things. They're all producing similar types of content, and they're doing it for similar ends, to increase self-service and to increase feature adoption. It just suddenly made sense to bring them together, and it's been really successful in doing that. And so that's something, first off, that I would recommend to all companies. If you have disparate content teams across the organization producing similar types of training content or documentation, bringing them together under a shared roof with shared targets, I think is the right move. But practically speaking, what this means in terms of our product surface is these four elements. We have our knowledge base, which is help.muse.com, where the help articles live. And as we'll see, this has evolved from a place where customers go to search for answers to the single source of truth. And all of the other surfaces here that I'm mentioning, all of the other types of content are really fed off of the knowledge base. And that's ultimately like the evolution that I'm talking about and suggesting today. It really is a mindset shift from thinking about the knowledge base as pull content, a place where the user needs to go to search for answers, to thinking of it as the foundation or the substrate of knowledge that can feed into many different funnels, many different tools and pathways. So that knowledge base is combined with Muse University, excuse me. And this is a place where primarily newly onboarding users are going. They're automatically assigned a learning path depending on their role in the hotel. And then we continue to engage and continue to create new content as we release new features and new products. Those two things are combined with in-product guidance. This is contextual help that's actually in the platform, in the product, popping up at the moment of need in particularly complex flows or areas of the product where we see there are knowledge gaps or there are support issues. We surface content directly in the product to guide people through those points of friction. And then finally, we have Ada, which is, as I mentioned, our AI chatbot for customer support. And this is really the pivotal foundation of the talk today. It's a chatbot directly in the product that users can interface with. And this is fed primarily on the knowledge base. And that's a really important point that I'll be coming back to again. The knowledge base is the foundation for AI in product content. So to go back a couple years, we were just the product content team. I was director of product content. And one day we got Ada. We decided we were going to launch this customer support chatbot. Ada is just one example. There are many different tools out there. Fin is an example from Intercom. But we decided we were going to launch a customer support chatbot. And I remember, being involved in those early conversations and some of the early testing. And when we finally signed, really kind of sitting back in my chair and thinking, wow, this is going to change things for us. Suddenly we had a new delivery system for the content. We had new, search parameters to think about. We had an audit of the knowledge base that had to happen. And the primary shift there was suddenly thinking about the knowledge base as something that is searched not by human beings, but is searched by bots. So, moving from this idea of we're creating documents for a human user to read and to search through. And in that case, we're thinking a lot about tone and voice. We're thinking about traditional discoverability like SEO, navigation on the help center. We're thinking about all sorts of things with structures and tables of contents and, accordion structures to shorten the text. All of these things that would make the reading experience for humans better. And we'd done a lot of great work and we were in a really great place. But suddenly we had this idea that, wait a second, it's not just going to be humans who are searching this knowledge base. It's going to be AI. And what does that change? And it changed things significantly, I would say. And so kind of reckoning with this, I was familiar with AI. I'd used AI quite a bit for myself, but it was the first time in my career where I was thinking about AI in terms of the structure of the knowledge base, thinking about retrieval, disambiguation, thinking about the way that the LLM was going to search and what we needed to do in the knowledge base in order to surface the right knowledge at the right time for a bot rather than a human being. And it was a pivotal moment for me. And, this moment of realization that I need to really get active and get proactive and to get ahead of this change or otherwise, I'm going to be moved by the change rather than vice versa. I am sure you're familiar with customer support chatbots, but this is just a sample. This is how it works. We can see, there's a greeting. The user here is asking, how do I make a reservation? And let's see what Ada comes up with. It comes up with a step-by-step process of how to make a reservation. And that step-by-step process is directly sourced from the help article, How to Make a Reservation, right? And so seeing this in action, again, it really drove this point home of, wow, okay, now we're structuring this content. We're really creating this content for AI rather than for users. And so what does that mean for our current knowledge base? And what does that mean for the articles that we're going to produce from here on out? Because we knew we couldn't continue to do what we had been doing, which was, maximizing the value of the knowledge base for humans. And so to kind of summarize the key learnings that I came across and went through and learned myself in this process, I would say there's 6 things. First of all, if you're working in tech, if you have a product and you don't have an AI chatbot yet, you certainly should, and you probably will. And so if you're at this pivotal moment, or even if you already are using an AI chatbot, these are 6, I think, priorities in terms of a knowledge base audit to really make sure that it's performing optimally for AI. The first is, one topic, one home. You want to make sure that every topic that could be asked for is dealt with in one single article. And at the same time, you want to make sure that each article is dealing only with one topic. So previously, we had many, many long articles. For example, one of the longest articles was about the timeline. And the timeline is one of the key kind of dashboards in our product. And it's very complicated. There's a lot of information on that timeline. And we had one article explaining everything that was in that timeline. And what we learned very quickly was that for AI search, it's much better to break that very long article up into shorter single topic articles. And so that was the first part of the audit that we went about, breaking articles up to make sure that each article only has one thing that you're solving for, has one topic, and making sure there's no overlap in topics from one article to another. Then thinking about structure. So semantic HTML, using the proper headline hierarchies. This is much more important than beautiful prose. Previously we were thinking about tone of voice quite a bit. We were thinking about making the reading experience of the docs enjoyable, even like a little bit playful. And that's not helpful for AI. What is helpful for AI is extremely clear and consistent structure. And that's done through HTML and headlines and things like that. Most LLMs and this type of support chatbot, they chunk articles. So they're not providing the entire article. They're breaking the articles up into small pieces, depending on what the user is asking for. And so it's extremely important that the articles are broken up in different sections with different headlines. Everything's properly semantic in terms of the HTML. That's going to get the best search results. And then thinking about, writing for retrieval. Again, previously we would start these articles with a kind of preamble, with emojis and like friendly language and things like that. None of that's useful for AI. And in fact, more than just not being useful, in many cases, it actually hinders the AI. So it's all about using plain language. It's all about being extremely clear. It's about putting the question in the title of the article, front loading the answers, and just getting right to the point. And then thinking about the priorities for the knowledge base and for new articles, that those really need to be set by data. So again, the whole purpose of a knowledge base is to increase self-support, to decrease the number of support tickets. So in terms of prioritizing what you're writing in the knowledge base, it shouldn't just be on a whim, and it shouldn't just be based on what tickets are being opened for your content team. It should be around support tickets. What are the areas that are causing the most friction for users? What are the user journeys that that people are going through where they need guidance? What are they talking to the support chatbot about? Looking at the conversation logs. These are gold mines for ideas around new content. It shouldn't just be a feeling, or a question from a product team. Priorities in terms of the knowledge base need to be set by data from customer support and from data with the chatbot if you already have one. And then we come to metadata, which previously we had been, keeping up with as a matter of course, as a practice, kind of due diligence, but not as something that was really surfaced much to the user. But once we had the AI chatbot, the metadata became extremely important. I'm talking about, tags, summaries, version stamps, all of little details which a human user might not ever see become the kind of primary pathways for AI to sort through the knowledge base. Also, we learned to audit relentlessly, to archive articles that weren't being used, to update knowledge gaps, fill knowledge gaps as soon as we found them. Anytime we saw that there was a question where the chatbot couldn't supply a link to a help article or got the answer wrong, that immediately became a ticket for the team to sort out immediately. And here, like the idea of stale content becomes much more important. I think, with most knowledge bases and most content teams are relatively limited in size. You have a giant backlog. You know that the product is changing faster than you can ever update all the articles. Certainly, if you have screenshots or videos in your articles, it just becomes extremely time consuming to keep this stuff updated. So in many cases, what we decided to do was simplify the articles, make them less rich in terms of media, in terms of visual elements, in order to allow us to keep them updated more quickly. Ada in particular doesn't surface visuals. It doesn't surface videos or images. And so those things went from being something that we thought was extremely important to something that we were willing to sacrifice, because what we saw is that keeping the content up to date became extremely important. Because as you know, with AI, it will always give you a very confident answer, and it doesn't necessarily know that an article is out of date. So either you have to get very rigorous about archiving things as soon as they're out of date, or you need to make sure that you're keeping things up to date on a regular basis. So that left us with a big challenge, because in our knowledge base, we have about 1,500 articles, and that's only in English. We operate in 5 core languages, so it's 1,500 in English, plus French, German, Dutch, and Spanish. We couldn't do it all. We were rolling out Ada immediately. What are we going to do? So of course we triaged, we prioritized, and we prioritized the audit based on ticket volume associated with certain topics and articles, the likelihood of retrieval, and then the structural debt, like what really needed to be worked on. So out of those 1,500 articles, we saw about 600 that were driving real and regular ticket volume. And then we narrowed that down to about 200 that we could deal with, right away, all hands on deck in the first week, essentially. And these were high retrieval, high structural debt, high ticket volume. That's where we started. And that is how we prioritized. And it worked. So out of the box with the chatbot, we expected to have about 20% containment, meaning that 20% of the chats would not result in a customer support ticket. And at launch, we were at about 40% containment. So what that showed us is that our knowledge base was actually already in really good shape. So the things that I was saying before about this kind of paradigm shift of thinking about bots rather than humans searching for the content, I don't think this necessarily needs to be like a revolution in what you're doing. Essentially, if you're following best practices for knowledge bases, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. That said, there's no telling what the performance will be until you launch. But where we are today is between 85, 90% containment, which is excellent. And that is really a matter of how we have continued the audit of the knowledge base under those 6 points that I mentioned before. But I think more importantly, how we used those learnings to make sure we weren't continuing the same mistakes with new content. So at the same moment that we started the audit of the existing knowledge base, we put new templates, new rules, new SOPs in place to ensure that everything we produced from the moment we introduced the chatbot was going to be maximized for chatbot performance. And that's got us to where we are today. So as I was saying, it's not necessarily a seismic shift. If you've been really rigorous in following best practices for knowledge bases, then you're going to be in a good place. But there are some very specific things, I think, around metadata and tagging and nomenclature and titling and that sort of thing. Those are things that I often see shifting in very busy content teams. They're kind of nice to haves in a world where humans are searching for the content, but they become absolutely crucial in the world of AI search. But ultimately, it's not, as I said, a total seismic shift or a revolution. It's just an evolution, I would say, of the best practices that content teams should be following already. It's really just augmenting those for a new audience, which is AI. So as we rolled out the chatbot, we saw something interesting, and the traffic mix has totally flipped. And basically, as we expected, but still interesting to see, the organic traffic to our knowledge base went down, and more people were accessing the documents through Ada. And so where we are now is that the organic traffic, people going out, leaving the platform to go to help.muse.com and search through the knowledge base, that's gone down and down and down. And most people nowadays are accessing the content through Ada. So it doesn't mean that the content has become less important. Actually, it's become more important. It's just shifted in terms of how people are accessing that content. And I think this highlights and illustrates the main point that I'm getting at here, which is we're entering a world where content shouldn't be made for humans, because humans aren't going to be searching for the content. It should be made for AI, because AI is how users are going to be finding the content. Whether that's a support chatbot in your product, that's it, or that's an internal chatbot that the company might have or the user might have, whether that's Glean or ChatGPT or Claude, or even using the AI capabilities of Google. More and more, this idea of like organic traffic and a knowledge base as a place where people go for answers, that's disappearing. So, again, talking about this pivotal moment, and I think things are continuing to change very, very fast. I think the past was forgiving, but we're entering a moment where if you don't have the groundwork laid in a knowledge base for AI search, you're going to be in trouble, very, very quickly. And so like our results, which are excellent, are predicated on a technology like basic LLM technology, which is already over or very close to over. We're entering, we've already entered the agentic age, and more, as I said, it's not going to be people searching for answers, it's going to be bots searching for answers on their behalf. And so what I can see happening very clearly is soon it's going to be machines talking to other machines. We've gone from humans talking to humans in the classic content model to where we are, or where we've been in the examples I've been illustrating, which is humans talking to machines. And very, very quickly in the agentic world, it's going to be machines talking to machines. So there's a great chance that a human being will never look at your knowledge base because they're using an agent, they're using an AI search, capability. And so this idea then of humans writing content to allow machines to talk to other machines, I think it's very fascinating. So the content remains the same. We still need the articles, we still need the documentation, and certainly the core function and the core purpose of those things have not changed. But I think what has changed is the nature of the job and the nature of the purpose of what we're doing. Content used to be a deliverable. Teams were judged on, how many tickets they closed in a week, how many articles they published in a month. I was supposed to publish 10 articles. I published the 10 articles. I'm doing a great job. The answers are there. But now I really see knowledge bases as this foundation, as this substrate. It's a layer that every assistant in your stack is reading from. And now we start to get into the next phase of this talk, which is not just about customers using AI to get info from the bot, but what are the other tools that are available that can accelerate the work of content teams? And for us, I've already mentioned these 4 types of content that we're producing, and all of that is fed off of the knowledge base. So the knowledge base really is the single source of truth for the customer support chatbot, for the training platform, for the in-product guidance that we're providing, but also, and here's where I'll go next, is for these internal tools. So once we were satisfied that the knowledge base was working well in the age of AI, we started to build on top of it. We started to look for more opportunities of how can we use AI not just to solve customer support challenges or issues, but how can we use AI to transform the whole idea of knowledge in our organization, both for internal and external users. So what we started to do was use AI to analyze AI. And so using Claude, we built a pipeline where on a weekly and a monthly and a quarterly basis, we're using Claude and an MCP from Ada to pull every conversation that Ada has. We're talking about 10,000 conversations a month, give or take, across all our different products. So we have an automation running where Claude pulls all of the conversations. It analyzes all the conversations. It identifies topics. It identifies knowledge gaps. It identifies trends and handoffs, drivers of negative CSAT. And we produce reports for all of our products every month automatically using templates. And so for every month we get a report for the product teams. These are the areas in your product that are causing customer support issues. We get reports for the Ada team. These are the kind of bot behaviors that should be modified. We get reports for the content teams. These are the knowledge gaps. These are the areas that we're missing out on guidance for Ada. And so these are turned automatically into artifacts that we then use to fill the knowledge gaps, to change the product, to improve the product. And so we're filling knowledge gaps and we're filling product gaps. We're addressing the content team, we're addressing the product teams. And so this was very interesting because these things that we're identifying, they're not Ada problems, they're knowledge problems or they're product problems. And so suddenly, the line between what's a content issue and what's a product issue becomes much clearer and much easier to distinguish. And it gives us the fuel for really great conversations with the product teams. These are the things that you need to change in the product because, yes, we could document these things, but that's just a Band-Aid over a poor product experience. And that has been a real driver of change, positive change in the product, and also a driver of value in terms of like the value that the content team is bringing, because we're not just using this knowledge to improve the knowledge base, we're using it to improve the product ultimately, which is a very powerful thing. But we kept going. We're very ambitious at Muse. And so we started to think, AI has been so great in terms of support, but how can we use AI to improve the way that we work? And so we created, again, using Claude, this drafting console, which you can see it's very early prototype. This is literally in the last several weeks that we've launched this. So it's a little, not as beautiful as it will be soon. But what this does then is allows us to address, I think, a universal problem for content teams. We were always facing this issue where we were getting tickets for release notes and documentation at the very end when the product was about to be launched, and it didn't give us a lot of time to write our docs. And so this constant complaint that I've heard throughout my career, why is content always an afterthought? Why don't PMs think about documentation sooner? Why are we always being brought into the conversation at the very end when it's too late, and too little? And so with this drafting console, which is a relatively simple setup, in Claude, what this does is automatically pulls from Jira tickets when not a Jira ticket for the content team, but when a work item is started by a product team, it's going to be a release. That is flagged, it's pulled into the drafting console, and the console automatically drafts release notes, help articles, and in-app guidance using all the knowledge we've fed into it. In this case, all of our guidelines, style guidelines, templates, things like that. And it automatically produces drafts. It publishes those in Confluence. We get an SME review with comments in Confluence. We run it again. It pulls all those comments and it produces a final draft. And this has been revolutionary. We're running a pretty lean content team of technical writers, and this has allowed us to scale incredibly. And the team is super happy with it. And this was like a second element that I would mention. I mentioned the importance of keeping the knowledge base healthy, using best practices. Also, then when we're entering, when you're bringing AI into content, templates, style guidelines, all of those sort of things become extremely important because those are the things that you train whatever kind of content tool you're creating on. And without those things, you're starting from scratch. And ultimately, when you are creating something like this, you don't want to spend your time fixing what the bot produces. You want to spend your time on the other end of the process, which is perfecting the skills, perfecting the prompts, perfecting the knowledge that the bot has to draw from. Because if you're getting it to generate a release note and then you're editing the release note because it's not perfect, that's always a one-off change, right? So instead of editing the release note, you want to edit the input rather than the output. And that's going to make that change reapply. And it's going to snowball and have this compounding effect where you're continuously improving the bot until it gets to exactly where it needs to be, and you're not going to need to make any changes to the output at all. And then we kept going. We said, how can we build something specifically for Muse University now for the training content? Because as I said, Ada is pulling off the knowledge base in the help articles, and the training content is something different. So this is using Rovo, which is Confluence, another tool we use, and Confluence's AI is Rovo. But we built this discovery agent for our learning content. And this is, a plain language chat interface. And this allows us to surface. We started primarily for internal users, for employees. And this was intended for customer-facing teams, so we can get them to surface the training content to their properties, because ultimately we're trying to increase training to decrease support tickets. So we wanted to make it easier for them to find this content. And you can see here, I'm asking what courses do we have from Muse BI, and it's surfacing those learning courses. So this was super useful for those customer-facing teams. And we've seen a big increase in engagement from users with the Muse University content because it's just getting pushed to them more easily and more often. But then we connected this to Ada. And so now Ada will not just answer the question, but it will also recommend training. So for example, if a user asks a question about Muse Business Intelligence, Ada will not just answer the question for them, but then it will say, have you done the training? Because if you've done the training, you probably wouldn't need to ask this question. And this has been massively impactful, both for increasing engagement in the learning content and also decreasing support tickets. But again, this only works if everything is organized, and tagged correctly. So all of that hygiene is really, really important. And actually what we found when we started trying to build this is that the Muse University content was quite disorganized. It was randomly organized in multiple folders and files and things like that. So we had to do quite a bit of work to get that into a good enough shape to use for the AI. So all of this kind of connects to these four principles in the order of priority. And the first is that knowledge is a product. Documentation is part of the product. It's not simply a deliverable. It's not extraneous to the product. It's not something that's nice to have. It is a product, and you need to think about your documentation as a product and as a product surface. And that means you're continuously iterating on it. It's not that once you've published, you're done and you move on to the next thing. You're constantly thinking about and iterating, and that's extremely important. And then think about how AI sits at both ends of the loop. For us, one AI delivers the knowledge to the user. Another AI finds the gaps in the knowledge and helps us fill them. A third one helps us fill those gaps by drafting the next docs. And so it's multiple agents, all part of the same flywheel. And all of this is adding up to the fact that trained customers ask for help less. So there's a lot of investment that needs to happen upstream, and the impact shows really clearly downstream. And I think looking at support, tickets, and self-service rather than engagement with the docs is a way that content teams can really start to contribute to business value and business goals, and really start to have more serious conversations with business leaders about the value and the necessity of content. And then finally, shifting the gap finder before the audit. It's important really to be maintaining an awareness of the gaps. And simply looking at the responses of the AI isn't enough, because as we know, as I said, AI will always give you a confident answer, even if it doesn't know, even if it's hallucinating. And so I think, can't use the same AI to surface the knowledge and to find the gaps. You need to have multiple tools running in the same flywheel in order to get the best results. So where's all this going from here? I think, inside automation is a major thing. Automating this process of finding knowledge gaps, automating the process of finding where documentation can be improved, and even automating the creation of that documentation is certainly where we're going. From diagnostics to action, I think we're at a time when we can be confident in using AI to draft content, in using AI, for example, to open Jira tickets. So, for example, when we identify with the chatbot a product gap, the AI is automatically opening a ticket for the product team. There's no reason for someone to be in the middle of that. If there's a problem, we can discuss the problem when the ticket is addressed by the team, but we haven't seen many problems with that. And then also this idea that containment becomes upskilling. And this idea then thinking about AI for support, not just as a way to end that conversation without a ticket, but then to also provide some extra value, to provide some upskilling, to provide some training, and so this is knowledge. It's turning knowledge into push content rather than pull content. It's not something that the user needs to go and look for. It's something that we're presenting to the user in the moment of need. And ultimately, the horizon here, as I said, I think it's AI talking to AI. I think we're very rapidly entering a place where the human readers won't really be a thing. It's going to be using AI to create content that's surfaced and read by AI, which is, a little bit of a Blade Runner situation, but also I think really, really, really fascinating. And ultimately, I think there's a massive shift for writers, for content people. I think, writers in this new world become content engineers. The job moves up the stack. We're not thinking about shipping an article. We're thinking about shipping a system, a system that drafts the content, delivers the content, and is constantly learning from the performance of the content. And in this way, we get back to that idea of the paintbrush, and the byline shrinks. The idea of being a writer shrinks, but the value of the content and the leverage that content can drive increases exponentially. And that to me is super exciting. So I think step one is designing the systems that, the architecture that can produce and surface and analyze the content is very important. And then thinking about the prompts, this is where the kind of the taste or the aesthetics of a traditional content writer, I think it goes now into the prompts rather than into the articles, and shifting all that skill and knowledge and style into the prompts rather than continuously putting it into the articles, I think is a necessary next step. And then measuring, the output, looking at containment, looking at CSAT and sentiment, looking at gap reports for the product, for the knowledge base. It's about shipping the gap finder, reading the result, writing up the next brief, writing up the next prompt. This is really where I see things going. And I totally understand some content people won't want to go there. Some content people, many content people consider themselves writers, words people, and they want to continuously get their hands dirty and use the words. And I think that's totally fine. It's a question and a decision that we all need to make. But ultimately, I would really encourage you, to move in that direction and think about then, shifting from this idea from the knowledge base being this thing where the answers lived to it being the source of knowledge for the entire AI stack in a company. And I think then it's about utilizing these very powerful tools to enter a new era of content and a new era of technical writing and documentation. But to do that, you've got to grab the paintbrush. Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's session. A huge thanks to you for walking us through the topic. To everyone who tuned in, thank you for taking your time to be here and for all your great questions and comments. And of course, if you have more questions or want to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be back soon with another session. Until then, see you next time. Thank you, Stephen. Have a nice day, and thank you everyone for joining.